You have to have money to make money. It's called a currency for a reason. Being able to recognize that when you create value, that's when you get money back.
I met Zina at Cannes Lions in June. I thought I was going to another event. I ended up at this event where you were a panelist, and it was the most exhilarating conversation. But for the world who doesn't know you and who weren't at Cannes, can you please introduce yourself to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Zina Ajlouny. I'm now based in New York. I previously was based in Dubai, San Francisco, Hong Kong, London, Paris. I have what I call location ADD. So I just get excited about learning about new cultures and experiences. But now I call New York home, which is great. And in terms of what I do now, I'm mostly focused on leadership advisory. Previously, I co founded 3 different companies, which I think just speaks to the fact that I really love working with new people, building things from scratch. I know a lot of your audience is creatives that also love building. So I had an interesting career where right after university, I moved to Hong Kong. I worked in consulting. And then after that, I launched a startup when I was 24 in San Francisco. It was a luxury e-commerce startup. We ran that for 3.5 years, very wear every hat possible. And our startup got acquired by Moda Operandi, which was a great experience. And then I went to business school in France and Singapore at INSEAD. After that, a little not creative, but ended up at the Boston Consulting Group, where it was a very structured regime where I learned a lot. And then I went back to my entrepreneurial roots and joined the largest startup in the Middle East, which is called Kareem. It's still running. I was there for 3 years and change until it got acquired by Uber for a cool $3 billion. And now I've moved more closely into helping individuals and corporations on leadership advisory.
That is a very colorful and
That's all over the place.
all over the place. There are two things. I read somewhere that you have visited 70 countries, which is no small feat in itself. I mean, how do you fit all of that in, plus 3 businesses, plus your consulting, plus your education? How do you do all of that?
I feel like I started young. I had a sort of insatiable curiosity for exploring the world. I started when I was 19. I studied abroad in Barcelona. And I feel like after that, I just got the itch to just keep exploring around. And it's part of what led me to move to Hong Kong, which I'd never been to before. And I didn't know anyone there, which I think was a little bonkers to do. And Hong Kong is the place where I really feel like I racked up a lot of countries, because the job that I took over there, it had sort of like flexible Fridays where I would use it as 3-day weekends and just go to China by myself, go convince a friend to go to Thailand. It really just became a let me just keep exploring. And I really loved it. I loved learning about cultures. I loved traveling. I became obsessed with like travel recommendations. I'm now the travel recommendations guru to all my friends. But I will say, in doing that, sometimes I can be decently annoying because I don't want to go to places I've been before. And I ended up in Uzbekistan, like really random places, kind of just to explore. And I feel like it's off the beaten path of the usual Italy, Spain that Americans end up going to a lot.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much through that because it's such a different experience.
I can also see that the travel, the meeting of different cultures, it must be so fulfilling, first of all, but also so useful in the business sense, because you learn to read and understand people and communicate so differently with each and every culture. Have you found that that has been an asset to you as well?
I think it's having the open mindedness of, have you heard of third culture kids?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
maybe for
So,
the listeners, you should explain what that means.
well, I learned what it was when I was 27. And then I feel like it changed my life because I no longer felt like an outsider.
Yeah.
So, a third culture kid is a person that is living in a culture where they are not we're not born in and are not ethnically from. So the third culture becomes like this other,
Yeah.
that where you feel other in a new country. So when I was in Hong Kong, I was a third culture kid because I was born in Jordan, I was raised in New York in the Middle East, and Hong Kong was this entirely third culture. So I then became a third culture kid. And I think when you become in a place where you're really not familiar with, you learn how to work with all ethnicities, right? When I walked into my first day of work in Hong Kong, it was mostly non-Western people who I was used to working with. And it gives you a sense of adaptability that you really learn to work with everyone. But what's really important is you have to understand the cultural nuances to things. So even silly little things. I think one of my favorite stories was in Hong Kong. We used to have birthdays for whoever it was, and there'd be a cake for birthdays. And what we found is the Westerners in the office were like so excited to eat the cake and like have huge slices. And then in the culture that I was in, it was like sugar was horrible and no one ate cakes, even if it was their own birthday. And they had like more savory type things. And it's just, even if it's food wise, it's learning how you can adapt to different cultures without being offensive
Mhm.
and being like, here, have this. And it's like, you don't grow up with, huge birthday cakes like we do.
Like, just going back to countries for a second, what is the next country on your list?
So I did a South America trip 2 years ago where I did Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. And I'm just itching to go back to that region. I know all the countries are very, very different.
Yeah.
But next on the list is maybe a bit trite, and a lot of other people have done it. But I really want to go to Peru and attempt to climb Machu Picchu and yeah, just kind of explore around there and then maybe Chile on the way. I try and batch things together so that, you don't have to go back there multiple times.
Yeah. You mentioned that you've been in startups, and I get people and they're like, yeah, my niche is startups, but I don't think they know what they're talking about. What would you say the difference between a startup is and a business that is just starting new?
Look, I think the definition of startup is very broad and people use that to their advantage. I think if someone's starting something up, they can call it a startup. But in the traditional term, startup tends to be more focused on a tech business.
Mhm.
Like if you're opening a laundromat, I don't think most people would call it a startup, but some people do, right?
Okay.
They're saying I'm starting up and therefore, it's a startup. Or, I'm launching a creative agency, therefore it's a startup.
Mm.
Traditionally, startups tend to be just more tech businesses.
So I would probably classify startups as also the ones who are looking to scale fast. So a business that is just new isn't necessarily a startup, but a startup is someone who's like, okay, we're planning to scale. We're going to go for accelerated growth. I don't know if that's just me, but that's whenever someone has said to me like, oh yeah, my target is startups. I'm like, yeah, but that is literally any company that's starting, or you actually mean a startup that is looking to scale and grow, which means they're seeking funding in a particular way. Am I wrong in my definition there, or would that also track?
I think, like I mentioned, it's startups tend to be more tech focused, and if you're tech focused, therefore you can scale
Yeah,
faster.
true.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not really the reality a lot of the times because everyone wants to grow fast and everyone wants to raise a gajillion dollars and have this great valuation and then keep scaling. But I would also say startups are a lot more risky,
Yeah.
right? Like creative type agencies don't have that type of risk that's associated with raising a bunch of money. And I think everyone, when they're starting their business, thinks they're going to be the exception of the rule where they're actually going to be the 10% that end up making it. And VCs know that 90% of the businesses that they're investing in are probably either going to break even if they're lucky or die out. And it takes a very different type of mindset to want to go on the experience of scaling quickly.
Mm.
And one of the interesting things about scaling quickly that I've found, because through mentoring a lot of startups and being thankful enough to have worked in an accelerator with 500 startups, is in the beginning, and Paul Graham says this, people should do things that don't scale. right? It's like the Airbnb where the first thing that they did was they were manually kind of doing bookings. That wasn't a scalable type business. They also, I don't know if you know this, but they sold cereal boxes so that they could raise funding during like Obama and McCain's run for office. And that was how they originally raised funding. It's like a really fun, quirky story, but that's not scalable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people become obsessed with scaling, but you can't scale before you know if something works, because then you're wasting your time.
When I speak to some of my creative clients, they work with pitch decks. And this is one of the questions I asked you, and it came up. I can't recall who it was. Was there an Emma on the panel? I don't know. I can't remember. But she had the talk afterwards. She was like, investors are only looking at numbers. Numbers is the only thing. And I'm like, but what about the design? What about the design of the deck? What about the storytelling of it all? Because that's what my clients do, right? They're like, we do storytelling through visuals. The copywriters are using words. And I'm like, my clients are going to feel gutted if their part isn't valued. Can you speak to your experience of the the importance of the creative in pitching, in the decks, of what you've seen? And is there any importance to it? Or is it just, or are the investors only looking at numbers and going like, oh, you know what? I don't care what it looks like, what your story is, and how you share it. If the numbers don't say anything, then we're not interested.
It's very dependent on the stage the company's at and the track record of the team involved, right? So if you are a founder that's already sold a company and have a track record with the VC, and you give them 10 slides that's really simple saying, these are the 10 things that, it follows the standard structure of here's the problem, here's the solution, here's how we're going to do it, here's the team, here's the timeline, here's how we're going to use your money. And it's super basic and you have a track record, you'll have a far easier way of raising funding, right? But that's mostly because of the
Yeah.
track record. If you're new to the game and new to the startup world, I would say aesthetics matter, but idea matters, team matters, and you need to have a baseline, right? Because I've seen so many beautiful decks that are done, but it doesn't sound like a great business, right? So I think investors, savvy enough investors, are smart enough to be able to look past the visuals of things. And I've also heard investors say, if you're spending too much time on a pitch deck, you're not spending enough time on a business. It's really dependent, but if you're past the stage where you've launched and you've deployed capital and you've been operational for like 6 months, of course numbers matter, right? In the end of the day, if someone's investing, they want a return and they want to see that and the way people usually communicate is through, I spent this much to acquire the customer. This is how much, the customer ended up spending. This is what we think the customer lifetime value is. You need to be able to speak the language, right? And the language can't just be pretty pictures. The language has to be,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be able to bring yourself up to speed on what investors care about. Because in the end, you're not selling a creative agency, you're selling a business.
Okay, so are you saying that the creative doesn't matter?
No, it does matter.
It
But
does
it
matter.
matters, like it it matters in the sense that it needs to be presentable. There's
Mm-hmm.
a point where you just optimize the deck too much and you're not caring enough about the business, which I've seen people sit and like try and do the same slide 12 times.
Okay.
It's like, no, go talk to customers. You're probably spending your time too much on building together a deck when you should be just trying to acquire customers. That's what investors care about. Customers and people caring about this business.
Okay. And what about the storytelling aspect in the deck? How it's communicated?
In my experience, it's so much stronger when there is a story behind it, right? Of how did the business start? Why do you care about this problem? Why is the timing important now? And it's not just about the deck, right? The deck, in the end of the day, is a static piece of paper. In the end, it's the dynamic way that people are able to communicate the story that really does exist, and in an authentic way. And I'm one of the things with 500 startups, which we do, is we have demo day. like Y Combinator, like, a lot of other accelerators. And in that, it's a 2-minute pitch where you go on stage, you're in front of 100 plus investors. In Saudi, it was at the Four Seasons. And what do we work on? We work on the story, but the
Hmm.
story with the deck in the background, right? Because you need to be believable.
Yeah.
So there is a balance about both. And if you can actually show investors why you care, why you're the best app to solve this problem, why you care about it more than anyone else. The other fear is that someone else can just come along and build this. But you
Hmm.
need to be able to show your passion and sometimes your connections or your expertise. And that's part of the story.
You've had three businesses. Did all of them get acquired?
So the first one is was called Bonfair. It was
Yeah.
luxury e-commerce. We brought up and coming designers online. That one got acquired, which was
Hmm.
great. Other one is a company called Palma de Salus, where we do luxury personal care. We started in the pandemic with luxury hand sanitizer,
Hmm.
and that business is still growing. We just got into a really big retailer in LA that we're excited about.
Nice.
And then the third one is the one that I'm working on now, which is called Human Intelligence, which is the leadership advisory.
Hmm.
And that's less startup because it's less tech enabled, but the other ones were more tech enabled.
Yeah. I think the reason I ask is because whenever I have guests come on, we talk about money. We talk about the relationship with money, what it's like, and you being have been acquired by one, so surrounded by lots of money, dealing with loads of startups, also surrounded, like there's a lot of money around you, exchanging hands. What is your relationship with money?
I think in the end, money's an enabler, right? It's how do you utilize it? They always say you have to have money to make money, right?
Hmm.
And that's why I think a lot of people end up raising venture capital because in order to grow these businesses, you're in a very competitive market, especially in the US. So, if you're competing, like we have a personal care brand, who are we competing against? I mean, it's, different products, but Rode, right? And if they raise $200 million to do something and we raise significantly less, money's an enabler to them, right? They can launch ad campaigns, they can, hire different influencers. It's really, it's a crowded space when a lot of people have a lot of money and you have to compete against them. So a lot of times that's why people raise money because even in this AI race that's happening right now, it's how can you compete and have more resources in order to acquire more customers. And relationship is really just seeing it as an enabler to be able to build something bigger than what's given to you, right? Like if you get given $10 million, the goal is hopefully so that you can grow it to $100 million.
But did you always have this relationship with money, or did it become so?
I grew up in a household where my grandparents were all Palestinian refugees. They were all forced out of Palestine in 1948. And interestingly, each my mom's side and my dad's side took very different perspectives towards it. I feel like I was always at a crossroads where I had one side of the family that was always very obsessed with acquiring, and one that was probably a bit more interested in just living well with money. So I felt like I had to create my own relationship of realizing that it's called a currency for a reason, and
Mm.
it's being able to recognize that when you create value, that's when you get money back, right? And it's creating value, whether it's creating a product, whether it's a service. When you do create something, the hope is that you can sell it to someone else that needs it so that you can actually end up, acquiring more.
So when did that come into your awareness that I have to create my own relationship with this? And you mentioned that you realize that, if there is value, then money will come because an exchange will happen. How old were you at that stage?
It's still an evolutionary thing that I still continue with, right? Because right now we're building out this like leadership advisory business, and it's how do you price it, right? How do
Mm.
you actually end up pricing? an hourly rate, and sometimes we share the hourly rate that we have as a business, and some people balk at it thinking it's a little high, and it's you're not paying for that 1 hour, right? You end up paying for all the experience that went into it, so that there is value in that. What I find, because I work with a lot of women, is women tend to undervalue their work. So, for example, I have a client that I was working with a couple weeks ago, very big name influencer. We're working on building out her offering and, increasing her revenue stream. And what was interesting to me is she came at it from a perspective of growing up without significant means, and how she felt bad asking for money for her work, because she was like, what if people can't eat because they're paying me for this? And I feel like there's so much to unravel with people's relationships with money. And I feel like I'm very thankful that I get a front row seat to be able to really work with people one on one to unravel things, so that it they can help unlock pieces of them that they didn't even know existed, right? And this woman is incredible. She does great work. I work with her on a personal level. I also work on coaching her, and it's about helping her recognize her worth and not being ashamed to ask for what she should be. um, I really find it fascinating, because I've worked with enough women and enough men to tell you that I can confidently say most of the time women have issue asking for money and men do not.
I can I can say it's the same. Based on all the clients that I've had, they come with more confidence to the table.
We were testing a company earlier this year, and I work out of WeWork, and I feel like WeWork's the best place in the world to talk to customers. I basically put up a stand that said, free cupcakes, come talk to me for 10 minutes. Mostly it's a way of testing if there's demand for a business. That's, one of the ways that you can do it. And there was a gentleman that was helping me with pricing for something and thinking through pricing. And then he sat with me for like 20 minutes. And then I was like, hey, can I follow up and ask for ask for maybe more advice with this? He was like, yeah. He was like, I'll be happy to send you my rate card. And I was like, okay. And then, like, maybe an hour later, this lovely woman came, and she was a copywriter. And she was going through the website that we had created, and also spent like 10, 20 minutes with us. And then I was like, hey, do you mind if we like update things, if we can go through? She was like, yeah, of course, no problem. Just let me know when. And I feel like that's even a really simple example of how in this example, the man was like, yes, my time is valuable. This is the cost of it. And then the woman that I happened to be speaking with was just like, yeah, of course, anytime. And I like, that was so indicative to me. I feel like there's this shame of asking for money for your expertise.
Yeah. But how did you receive the man who said, I'll send you my rate card? How did you receive that the way he said it?
I was surprised, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was more like, come on, man, we're where we work. Like, it's like 20 minutes. But I think it's a valuable piece. His time's valuable, my time's valuable, the copywriter's time is valuable. He's
Yeah.
just saying, if you want more help, I'm happy to help you, but there's value and service in what I'm giving to you.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with it. I think, I don't know how he actually did it, but I think there may be better ways of doing it. So it's nice to kind of see like a scenario where all of that plays out right in front of you, and then seeing how different the gender gap is and how people communicate and value themselves. Why do you think that is? What's your take on it?
I probably haven't reflected enough on it. I think, and this is a generalization, women just tend to be givers, and they just give selflessly and maybe don't think of it as a business transaction. Whereas I think maybe the male mind is more geared towards business and transactions. And women tend to be maybe a bit more nurturing with things, where they just want to help out with everything.
Hmm.
And that ends up probably creating a really big gap in the long term. And it's what I love working with people on, is helping them recognize their value and helping them create an offering and being very concrete about their offering and recognizing what value they are bringing to the world. Because every single person on this earth has a value. And it's not
Absolutely.
just derived through work, right? I think a lot of times people think it's just derived through work and money and all these things. No, it's not. But in what I do, it's helping people recognize that through work
Hmm.
and creating really concrete offerings, price points, having conversations, making people really experiment with how to have conversations they don't want to have.
I can talk to you for ages, but we're running out of time. Is there something you'd like to share with the world that you're working on right now that, or you want to point people towards, anything like that?
Yeah, so myself and my colleague Patrick, who he's my business partner in a company that we founded, what we do is we do leadership advising. So we really love working with individuals, working with corporations on how people can become the best version of themselves and make it trackable, right? So a lot of times I think people in their head feel like they can be doing more
Mm.
or that they're not living up to their expectations or they really have this goal but they're not working towards it and they don't know why and a lot of other things. And it's what we do is help work with people one on one on unlocking whatever it is that is holding them back and being really accountable,
Mm.
right? It's one of my favorite things when you work with people sort of one on one weekly is if I always make this is the action plan for the week. It's co-created. And
Yeah.
then the first thing we do in the next meeting is, okay, what happened?
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes so many mental blocks that are holding people from moving forward,
Yeah.
where it's, I don't want to tell someone about this. I don't want to have this conversation. Ugh, cringe. And it's pushing people outside their comfort zone and knowing that you'll be okay. Like you'll be okay and you can push yourself. And that's why I've had so many coaches that have helped coach me on finding what I've wanted to do in my life that I
Hmm.
feel so grateful to be able to have a business that I can give back and do that for others. And that's the value that I'm trying to create in the world to bring that human intelligence back into the world and not have everyone chatting into chat GBT, what do I do with my life? And figuring it out inside because that's where the answers are. Like the answers are all inside. They're, computers can help, AI can help, but ultimately we all know inside and it's about listening to the voice and sometimes having little coaching that helps to find out what that voice is.
Where can people connect with you?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Zina Ajlouny. Fun fact: I'm the only person in the world with my
Oh,
name,
really?
so it's simple enough. Or my Instagram is Zina Now, ZINANOW.
I'll share the links below. Zina, you've been amazing. Thank you for coming and being so open and sharing all your experiences with us. And I wish you all the best in your business, and we'll keep in touch either way.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of The Creative Flight. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I invite you to leave a review. It really helps more creators find the show. For more insights and behind the scenes content, you can follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn. You can also check out my resources on ivymalik.com. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep creating, keep pushing those boundaries, and keep taking flight.